We're gonna go ahead. If I could have your attention, I'd like to get us started. It is such a privilege to welcome you on behalf of our founders and sponsors, the Norbertines, our trustees, the faculty and staff, and the students of St. Norbert College. I'm Brian Brees, the president of the college, and it's a distinct privilege to welcome you to here to Butimore and our second installment of the CEO breakfast series and strategy. It is exciting to be here and to, this is our 20th year of offering this series of bringing together regional CEOs to network with the community and to hear what's happening in their organization and to hear a bit about their leadership and what they're doing. And this resource, this running for 20 years now, has been generously supported by our sponsors. If I could just share with you the names of these sponsors, and throughout the day and throughout the series, if you would, as you bump into them, just thank them for their generosity. But our presenting sponsor is WPS Health Insurance and Arise Health Plan. Our title sponsors, Myron Construction, Insight Publication, Johnson Bank, Johnson Insurance, and our sponsor for this session is Bank First. Can we give our sponsors a round of applause, please? At your tables, you have folders with information about our sponsors. I encourage you to take that with you and engage with them and thank them for their generosity as we can. At this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Jason Salisbury, campus minister at the college, to offer grace. After grace, breakfast will be served, and at the top of the hour, we'll introduce our speaker. So please, Jason.
Good morning. Good morning. Let's just take a moment to silence ourselves and place ourselves in the presence of God. Blessed are you, Lord God of all creation. In your goodness, love, and wisdom, you have created us. You have called us to be stewards of all you have created in this world. Guide our hearts as we continuously seek you first in all that we do. We entrust our lives to you. We entrust our businesses to you. We entrust our suppliers, employees, and customers to you. May we always be mindful of their service and thankful for their dedication. We confess that without you we have nothing, and therefore we place our trust completely in you. We acknowledge and remember the many times we have fallen, when we have not lived up to others' expectations, or those we place heavily upon ourselves. We give you thanks and praise that in these moments you did not abandon us, but rather saw us through them, helping us to grow and become better leaders along the way. May our time together this morning be fruitful. May this time be blessed. May you bless this food. May you bless our conversations. We ask all of this in your name. Amen.
Amen. If I could have your attention, I know you're still finishing up breakfast, maybe getting another cup of coffee, but it's we're right at 8 o'clock, and I like to run a timely operation here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to the group Jack Pelton. I was just having, obviously, breakfast with him, and this guy's got a lot of energy and excitement for aviation and flying, and I was telling him that I have this reoccurring dream of flying like a bird, but I never thought I could ever fly and be a pilot, and he's leading me to believe that it's possible, and so I'm really excited about this. Amy's looking a little nervous. Oh boy, he's going to go get us. Don't tell my wife that I just said that. But. Jack was named as EAA's Chief Executive Officer in 2015. And when that happened, it added a great deal to his already bulging portfolio with the responsibilities of chair of the board, in which he was elected to in 2012. In his role as a chairman and CEO, Jack leads the organization's board and staff in its mission of growing participation and interest in aviation and inspiring people to engage in flight. Formerly, Mr. Pelton served as chairman, president, and CEO of Cessna Aircraft Company. Prior to joining Cessna, he was the senior vice president of engineering for Dornier Aircraft in Germany. Mr. Pelton is past chairman of the General Aviation Manufacturers Association Board and served on the boards of the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, the National Business Aviation Association, and the Corporate Angel Network. He also served as volunteer chairman of EA's Gathering of Eagles, an annual fundraiser which has raised millions of dollars to inspire youth in aviation. He has received numerous awards, including the 2010 Lindbergh Award, the 2008 Aviation Week Laurel, and EA's highest honor, the Freedom of Flight Award. Mr. Pelton is a lifelong passionate aviation enthusiast who has devoted his life to restoring and flying vintage aircraft. If you get a chance, take a look at some of these pictures he has. They're beautiful. And of course, he holds airline transport and commercial pilot certificates. He loves to fly. Please welcome Jack Pelton.
The bird thing kind of concerns me a little bit, but I think we can. I got a path for you for a pilot's license, but it comes with an airplane, not your own wings attached. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come meet all of you and hopefully share a little bit about EA that you might not know about. Very complex and interesting organization that I think is making a real big difference currently in aviation. I'd like to know in the room how many EA members are there? Okay, that's good. So I'll get some feedback on job performance, which is good. How many of you are involved in some form or fashion with aviation? Okay, and does that mean pilots? Just in aviation, okay. So that's good, because then this won't be I've heard all this and I'm very familiar with the organization and what you guys do there. You know, we go back a long way. 1953, Paul Poberezny and a group of people in a basement in Milwaukee who had while they may have been involved in aviation, they had a passion around a specific interest in aviation, which was at that time designing and building and flying your own airplanes. And this means they were doing something that nobody else had even conceived of. And that was referred to as home building. And at that time, there was no really support system for that, even from a regulatory body in the FAA. It was a new frontier, if you will. And at that time, there was probably a lot of people that said that this is just a kind of a one-off, unique group of people who have this funny interest, and we'll kind of walk through where it ended up today, which is really made an enormous impact. And I credit Paul for being a leader that had a vision that, in fact, has changed the world. And I can give statistics around that as to how that has happened. When they met in January, they decided that later in the year they were going to have a fly-in in Milwaukee. It's a nice social gathering, and that's kind of how Paul created the organization, was to be interested in aviation, but also very social, community-based system. The interesting statistic on that was they had 21 aircraft and 150 people that showed up that September in Tenerman Field down in Milwaukee for that first flight. And I say it's interesting as we roll forward and look at where we are today. At that same time, and what really created this uniqueness about the organization was there was a gentleman named Ray Stitz that produced fabric for airplanes. So back in the day when airplanes were built, they were either all aluminum construction or they would be wood or tubes, and they had fabric that covered the structure of the airplanes. Ray was in that business, and he was located in Southern California, and he asked Paul, could I form my own chapter in California, which became Chapter 1. And why I'm talking about that is that became the genesis of how this organization rolled out around the country and around the world, was this chapter concept. And it was a concept that, and I don't mean to offend anybody from a religious perspective, being that we're at St. Norbert's event. My son is also a minister in Kansas City. But he really referred to them as his churches. And he felt that that was the way around the country we could set up these regional groups of like-minded people that had interest in aviation that could get together on some level of frequency and share that passion and desire around that common interest. So Ray founded Chapter 1 all the way out in California. So here we are with a group that started in Milwaukee. It's now got a chapter in California and starting to go spread literally Today we would say virally, but around the nation. My association was my dad was a member of Chapter 1 in Southern California. And he was also a passionate aviation person and brought me to the meetings and to the fly-ins and to the air shows as a young tyke. So there's a very intertwined history of personally being involved in aviation, and what sparked my interest and kept me associated with aviation from that time. My entire career has been in aviation. It was actually Douglas Aircraft in Southern California, which was acquired by Boeing, and I was part of that. I spent 21 plus years there in design, test, and manufacturing before getting asked to be chairman of Cessna. So Ray started Chapter 1. It started to expand. They outgrew Timmerman Field and moved to Rockford, where the fly-ins then gained some more traction and growth in Rockford, Illinois. And there is a leadership lesson out of the Rockford story that I think is very relevant to where we are today in 2017. So as it was growing in Rockford, EA and Paul were looking at where could they build more permanent facilities and have growth. And this is really a small sidebar story about economic development and growth. Oshkosh put on a full court press to entice EA to move up to the Oshkosh area, providing them incentives and facilities and other things. And the reason I talk about that is we're today in the same situation with Oshkosh Truck, who's being courted to leave the Oshkosh area to go to other areas. And if Rockford were to look back and say, if I could give Oshkosh, the city, a little story that they ought to pay attention to, is we let a very, very strong golden goose in the name of EA get away from Rockford and move to Oshkosh through economic development. And I say that because we just completed a study with the University of Oshkosh that showed that our event that we have, our now Paul's Convention and Fly-In from back then, provides $170 million of economic positive impact to this region. So it's very, if you're Rockford, you would be very sad, and if you're the city of Oshkosh, you have that same opportunity by not letting Oshkosh Truck headquarters leave the area. So it's a very interesting economic story, I think, from a development. So here we are today, many years later, and we have established over 800 chapters. At one point, we were almost up to 1,000, not only domestically, but literally around the world. You can find EA friends basically in Australia, Europe, South Africa, Canada, no matter where you travel in the world, South America. You'll find those chapters that are continuing Paul's vision of creating a community, a social community at a local level that shares the same common interest. But then people ask, that's interesting, what is EAA? I mean, what's the headquarters role and involvement in all of this? We grew and decided that the proposition for, I think I'm losing the mic, was we had to create values as a membership organization. We're essentially an association that through this membership organization has to have a purpose and a meaning for why you want to be a part of it, besides involved at your local level. And so Paul expanded the concept and thought of, we're going to be more than just home-built aircrafts and people that are building airplanes in their basements and their garage, that we're a much bigger community. There's sub-communities inside of EA. And he really created then the kind of the overarching tent that brought in every form of aviation, from the international aerobatic community to warbirds that are restoration and preserving the legacy of historical airplanes, to ultralights, which is pretty close to you strapping on some wings and flying, vintage airplanes, and really became all things aviation from a recreational and sport perspective. And with that, again, looking at the strategy of what is the value proposition and what do we as a organization need to bring to our members, it became very clear that the role was the support of those activities, and the support being advocacy in creating the regs and rules in Washington that would allow these types of airplanes to operate with the freedom of flight in our country in the national airspace, the preservation of that right, which we spend an awful lot of time on, and the movement of continuing to develop and grow that recreational sport category of airplanes. You know, I talk about the home-built piece, which everybody shakes their head and says, that's really started off being kind of weird and is probably a one-off hobby. And if you look at it today, statistically, it's very interesting. Coming out of the certified airplane manufacturing world from a career standpoint, I was pretty egotistical that the sunset and rise on Cessna Aircraft Company, we had 190,000 airplanes produced. We were the largest general aviation manufacturer. We were a $6 billion corporation, 15,000 employees. Today, the home-built category of airplanes, which has become very sophisticated. It's no longer just dreaming up something in your basement and cobbling it together. There's actually kit manufacturers that produce kits that you can, you know, I was at a Lions Club once, and that's kind of like getting the hook, you know, when they said, we're out of here, lunch is over. The kit manufacturers produce a kit that you, from a regulatory standpoint, you just need to build 51% of your airplane to consider it as an experimental home-built airplane. New batteries? Yeah, it's usually the case. And with that, you can now purchase a kit and produce it yourself very easily without much time, without much cost, and it's a very well-designed and engineered product that you know you're going to have success on it. Today, when you look at the FAA registration of new airplanes, so you have all these manufacturers, Cirrus, Piper, Cessna, Beechcraft, Husky, they produce certified airplanes that they build, produce, and deliver. They're on average today producing about 680 airplanes that get registered on an annual basis. On the experimental home-built kit vision that Paul had, it's at about 1,000 a year. So we are building and flying and producing more in the category that Paul envisioned back in 1953 than all of these manufacturers combined are doing. So who would have thought in 53 that that vision would have actually been carrying the day? And why I say that's so important is that in our local communities, the rural and regional airports are so important and vital to the economics of a healthy community and a healthy city and vibrant businesses. And without that movement, we probably wouldn't have some of these airports. We wouldn't have the FBOs, we wouldn't have the mechanics that service them, the fuel and all those capabilities. So Paul's legacy was for the organization to continue to look at how do we grow and expand participation in aviation by creating that right environment for that. He did some pioneering things back in the day with the recognition that the fuel that we use has a lead-based content in it, which isn't environmentally the best for us. And so he developed the ability and created a certification to use auto fuel in some categories of airplanes. Paul established that some time ago. Of recent, in the last, oh gosh, it's been probably now 8 years, he also created a new category of airplanes and got the FAA and the regulatory people to accept, called the light sport aircraft category, which was a new kind of below a private pilot's category of people being able to get a pilot's license with less requirements, flying in a little more restricted airspace without needing medical certification. And that, again, created a new wave and market of airplanes that were being built and produced that we're still seeing today. Of recent, we down in Oshkosh also worked very, very hard to change the regulations around what are the medical requirements. And some of that was very controversial when you compare pilots' licenses have to have a medical certificate to be able to fly. Similar to like the commercial trucking industry, you have to go in and get a physical every 2 years and meet certain standards to ensure there wouldn't be any capacitation in the airplane. When we got that changed last year, which was a significant shift to allow people to continue to be able to operate safely based on known safety statistics and medical history, which is again opening up and expanding the ability to get people into aviation and keep them involved. But what makes us part of us so unique is we do all of these things, and we're not a Washington Beltway group. We're not lined up with spending a bunch of people in Washington full-time. We have one individual there that kind of points us in the right direction. But we're really leaning on our board members, our contacts in the industry to support those activities and make this kind of legislation happen. I spend an incredible amount of time there, happen to have done a lot of that in my prior life, and right now we're fighting a very significant issue on the current administration's proposal to move the Air Traffic Control Organization out of the FAA and out of the government and putting it into a private entity. And while ideologically you can support privatization of many things if that's your particular bias, but in this case what they're proposing is not true privatization. It's really handing over all of your taxpayer assets that you put into building the infrastructure of our airspace system and handing it to a monopoly run by the airlines. But I won't run down that path, or you'll have me here for hours. I get really passionate about that one. The value proposition for the membership to assure that we are supporting them and that we're providing what they need to continue to recreationally fly and have the support and infrastructure has grown our membership now to, we're right at about 210,000 members, which is a pretty significant and powerful voice when we rally together to try to get things done. We think that that's, the importance of it is that we're doing the right things. We're doing the things that are important to our members, and that focus currently is keenly focused on youth education, the ability to try to bring youth into and getting them exposed to aviation in any form or fashion at the local level, at the chapter level, and then here in Oshkosh during the summer with our air academies that we run in a lodge full-time during the summer period. That is vitally important in order to ensure that we have a vibrant aviation community into the future. If you look at the demographics of aviation, the big boom time was post-World War II, where on the GI Bill, everybody went out and got a pilot's license, paid for through the GI Bill. Many got professional jobs in the airlines, and the airlines have a age 62 mandatory retirement, and we're seeing that cliff where they're all starting to retire out, and the farm system is not keeping up with feeding our industry. So we believe that that's where we want to spend our time, focusing on how do we get kids into and exposed to aviation and all forms and fashion. We're not focused on you got to go be a pilot. We want them to get exposed to, basically it's a form of STEM education to get them interested in all things that support aviation, because for every pilot there's 4 mechanics, there's 25 accountants, there's 300 marketing people, it goes on in that whole ecosystem of aviation. And we believe that, and I certainly can champion it coming out of the industry, this is all I've ever done and all I've ever lived for, is those are good, high-paying, meaningful jobs that have a significant impact on our nation's economy, literally in the billions. So there was a program created at EA that some people know about, and I don't think sometimes we get enough national recognition, and it was called our Young Eagles program, which 25 years ago, the vision was that out at these 800 chapters, we would have volunteers that would take young people up for a flight. And through that flight, they would get a certificate, they'd get a logbook, but it was all based on volunteers. 7,000 pilots annually around the country provide that, with over 5,000 people who support it as infrastructure on the ground. And we take kids at a rate of, over the last 25 years, we've flown 2 million young people. Our goal is to continue to keep expanding that and fill in the blanks of, I take you for the flight, I talk to you about aviation as a young person, but now how do I really engage and connect with you up until that age where you can actually go learn to fly, which is basically 16 and 17 years old. We do supply, through the support of our sponsors, a free ground school, online ground school, so that a young person, if you take that flight, you get access to that ground school through computer-based training to be able to get the written part of your training out of the way. But as far as our mission and our strategy, we recognize that it's not enough, and we have to now change who we are. We're not a bunch of people sitting around in a hangar. Hate to characterize as a good old boy club that talk about the good old days. We have to get into the minds, the phones, the education system of young people, and that's a significant shift for how we were structured as an organization. We're trying to learn. How do you get into augmented reality? How do you get into virtual reality? How do you get into the social media aspects of being able to attach and engage and keep kids after that flight thinking about and wanting to get involved in aviation in any form or fashion. So that's from an organizational perspective a significant shift and change for us, as opposed to just being perceived as you throw a really great air show and the rest of the year you put out some publications and magazines and call it good. We're not going to stop there and do that. We are going to really measure ourselves on, are we making a difference with those young people. The convention that I talked about with 21 planes and 150 people, well, today, this last July, we had 10,000 planes, 590,000 people. We had 881 exhibitors that were actually doing deals on the Oshkosh Airport, selling everything from headsets to airplanes to anything else that supports aviation. We hosted over 1,000 educational forums during that week, everything from getting somebody showing the pathway of how they can learn to fly, to safety tips, to just very interesting speakers around innovation. We had 11,000 people that were camping, and we had almost 1,000 media outlets that were there from around the world. So Paul's little air show down in Milwaukee has really changed into something significantly different. 15.4 million people were reached just by our social media avenues that we have in place. And what has kind of established the identity of the organization is, if you look at this year alone, to show the importance of EA in the aviation community, we had all of the remaining Apollo astronauts in attendance who considered this their last reunion to come together and share their stories of their history. But the thing that I'm most proud of is every one of them is an EA member. Every one of those Apollo astronauts has been a part of this organization for a long, long time, which is pretty impressive to have people like that on stage. And so some of those that have passed away are also in that same category. You have that history, then you look forward, and we had Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, show up and bring his Blue Origin booster rocket, which is going to start taking people up into space probably in the next year and a half. And he chose Oshkosh as his public debut of that booster rocket, which is, again, pretty impressive and shows the reach and depth that we have. And then to follow on as to how are we going to get to young people, we had a very unique situation where, if any of you Marvel comic fans or understand any of that, there's a few shy hands, the ones that we wouldn't recognize you because you're not in costume at Comic-Con. Stan Lee showed up, and Stan Lee gave a gift to EA of our own superhero, which he created, named Avior, that we now have the rights and access to use to be able, again, to get to these kids through various forms or fashion. My goal and vision in the next year is that we're going to have Avior and EA distributed throughout all of the school systems in the United States through the Scholastic program, the Scholastic book program that your kids bring home, or grandkids, that we will be a part of that, and we'll be getting into those homes of a whole new audience of young people. So when you look at our organization, from a leadership challenge standpoint, one of the things people probably don't recognize, and I certainly learned along the way, in the bio piece, the whole story of how I ended up and how long I've been there, I flunked retirement, and I came to EA. They asked me to join the board when I retired. And after I joined the board, they said, oh, by the way, we have a problem. We failed the leadership transition challenge, which can be tough in any role. And we botched it. It's all messed up. We're going to make you chairman of the board. Your first job is to fire the CEO and then go figure out how to sort this whole thing out as an unpaid volunteer. And I lived in Wichita, Kansas, and was commuting in my airplane. Said, okay, that's not exactly what my wife had in mind. She had just purchased a beautiful place in Key Largo, Florida, for us to spend our time. So I did that, and actually I failed that too, because it took me 3 years to get that sorted out. And the answer came back to the board was, well, we just need to keep him. We just need to put you in that role. And so that's what happened in 2015. And I intend to stay there for many, many, many more years. But taking over the organization, what was unique is you find out it's nothing like any of us operate in today. We have between 180, we flex to about 200 full-time employees in very classic traditional roles, from IT to accounting to marketing to publications to communications, that run an organization 52 weeks a year. Then we ask those people for 1 week a year, but it really ends up being about 3 months of planning and operation, to do something completely out of their skill set. So anybody in here an IT professional? Yeah. I was going to use that example, assuming that somebody was. Our head of IT is in charge of parking and camping. And I don't think he really thought that was going to be the case when he hired in. Our head of HR has the whole 11,000 people in the camping area for Camp Scholler. They have a second job that's a completely different function that runs this organization's event during the year. But the real magic to it is the volunteers. We have 5,000 volunteers that come every year to run the AirVenture activity. Those volunteers, some of them come as many as 2 months before the event, put their trailers in the park and start painting, cutting lawns, getting ready to throw this show. And when you think about it, especially if you monetize that, the value of those volunteer hours versus the staff, it would actually be impossible to be able to fund and do what we do if it were not for that volunteer base. So managing and leading volunteers versus 200 direct reports is a significantly different challenge. Different set of rules, different set of way of engaging them, a different set of way of getting them to have the ownership of running their areas as if they were mini CEOs of the functions that they have. So that's been a truly unique challenge for me. And I think my first year when I came in, they said, you know how to design, certify, support, sell airplanes. You've done that your whole life. And they said, so what's this like? I said, well, first of all, I didn't know how you arrange porta potties, and I didn't know that, how to get food vendors onto what essentially is a fair site. So a significantly different way you have to lead from the front to be able to understand the constituents that you actually have and understand really who your customers are. A customer in a traditional is the person that buys your product and you support them appropriately. In this case, your customers are really starts with your volunteers, because that's your largest base, your employees, then you have your donors, then you have your financial partners that support and exhibit at the event. So it's a very, very kind of complex bunch of moving parts. I think the one thing that helped me in my private life, I've always been very involved philanthropically in anything I do in a community. And at one time, I was running Wichita's Habitat for Humanity, and I thought, well, EA is going to be very similar. You got volunteers, they show up when there's a build, they come on site, they get it done, and they move on. And boy, was I wrong. This is like Habitat on steroids. And it's very difficult to kind of get it all to work. But one of the things that we had missing, and I know I'm going to be running out of time here shortly, is from a leadership standpoint, is to be able to get the organization through what was a little bit of a leadership crisis and kind of finding out and members starting to question what our value of being a member is, was we spent a lot of time really getting back to creating what our mission needs to be, revalidating our mission, putting together a strategy and a plan that people could understand, communicate it, and get buy-in from all of those constituents that I talked about, that showed what we're going to do over the next 5 years. And we're into year 4 of that 5-year plan, of which we will then continue to refine and focus where that needs to go. The good news is that the team worked so hard on understanding where we should be focused. It hasn't really changed. They created a lot of things, some lofty ambitions of what needs to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, and we're still tracking to that plan and putting our investments around making sure those things happen. And those things were significantly different than my predecessors, because we have to move with where things are going, which is changing so rapid, so dynamic, as far as, this is touching people, not necessarily a printed magazine. And where our people really are and how they operate. One of the things I like to talk about from a leadership standpoint is in doing that, and understanding really who you serve. We have a little mantra up at, I keep saying up, we are up down in Oshkosh. Our headquarters is located at 3000 Pobresny Drive. And I like to continually remind people that we don't work for those people in 3000 Pobresny Drive. We work for everybody, the 210,000 members that are outside of Pobresny Drive, and that has to be your focus and your attention. And the other big learning that we continue to work on is understanding, to be where we want to be in 10 years, what type of talent do we need to ensure that we can get there? I was very fortunate to work with Marshall Goldsmith in my career, who some of you may have read some of his coaching and leadership books. He's probably one of the best known authors in that area. Marshall worked with Alan Mulally and myself personally, who Alan ran Boeing, or he was the understudy at Boeing, but then was the CEO at Ford Motor Company. And we worked with Marshall on a book that he wrote that was called, let's see, the title of it is rather unique, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it's a very insightful book on trying to understand that those legacies and histories and traditions eventually get obsoleted with time and things that are occurring relative to world events. So you have to look at your talent in a similar way. So when you're looking at, if we're going to be very, very, I don't want to say web-based, but we're going to be in the augmented reality world, and we're going to be touching people through new and unique different ways, we got to make sure that we're growing and developing talent in the next 10 years that will get us to be able to have that capability to do that. One of the things that we have an advantage of is that we have, during the summer, we hire an incredible number of interns to be able to throw the event. And that is probably one of the best test drives of talent you can ever get. We're careful in how we recruit. We bring people in, and we have been able to really find some very, very sharp people that we can end up making offers to and hiring later, or we launch them into the world very proud of watching how successful their careers can be in different places that they go. So we're focused on having the right plan, lining up that plan, ensuring we've got the talent in the right places to support that. I'm a big believer on most of your time should be spent on developing your talent, and a lot of that is getting them in the right places and giving them the opportunities to be successful. I'm an anti-GE school of leadership where you bring people in and cycle them through at a rate and you just keep churning and burning them. I think our obligations as any good company or institution is to develop people and make sure they have a meaningful career and provide value to themselves, but also back in the communities where they live. And so we work very, very hard on lining that up. And we do then an incredible amount of planning. So when our event is over, we start right into the planning session of next year. And the planning session is very complex and interesting because it's about throwing an event that has, I would say over the last 4 years, our focus has been on making it as diverse as possible so that there's something for everybody. If you show up and you bring your family, they'll find something that will pique their interest. It won't be all focused on military aircraft. It won't be all focused on youth education. It will have everything from soup to nuts to expose people to. So that takes a very creative process in doing that, and then it takes fine-tuning that down into getting a plan that has that all in place and is ready to go once the event starts, and people all in the right places knowing what their functions and roles are. But what I want to close with is when you look at the planning process piece of it, a little question for all of you is, understanding strategic planning and planning is very important, but where would you rate, what do you, from an importance standpoint, would you put the highest priority on planning or executing? How many would do planning? Okay, executing? So I'd say most are saying executing. And that's really what one of the big takeaways in my career has been, that you know, you've got to get that plan about 80% right. But when you go into the executing mode, that plan was only as good as the plan was that day. And we talk about it at AirVenture. Everything's lined up, everything's perfect, everything's planned. It's Monday, AirVenture starts, throw the plan away. And I mean, it's good, it got you there. But all you have to have is a rainy day, you have to have something else happening, and you are now in execution recovery mode of trying to figure out how to call audibles and make those things happen. So I always encourage people, don't over-plan, really work hard on your skills to make sure that you're executing to deliver what you've set out as far as your objectives. And I think I'm behind a little bit here, so I'll take some questions. Yes, sir.
You talked earlier about Oshkosh putting on a full court press. Would you address that a little more? Were there other locations that were looked at? And I assume that you had a lot of property to locate this facility in Oshkosh.
Yeah, back when Paul was looking at a site, there were other cities that were courting him. Yeah, there was, I think, St. Louis, there was, I think, Iowa, just different places. It was very similar to in the corporate world. You know, anytime I opened a new plant anywhere, it was amazing, you know, the volumes of people that would come at you with, we want you here, and here's the incentives and reasons why you would come here. Oshkosh did a tremendous job with a well-established airport manager at the time, Steve Whitman, who was kind of an icon in the aviation industry. He led the delegation that met with Paul and company and said, come up here and here's what we can offer and what we can provide you. And you see that happening everywhere. Actually, one of the assignments that I got asked to do after I retired was I worked for a group that was doing site selection for Mitsubishi aircraft as to where they should put a plant in the United States. So they wanted a bunch of retired CEOs to kind of help them through that process. And it's probably one of the most competitive environments out there when you look at states and cities and communities that are vying for moving companies in. And the ones who have it organized and do it well are the states and communities that are thriving and bringing jobs to their communities.
I just have a short anecdote. About mid-1990s, I was walking around the EAA grounds in mid-afternoon, and I ran into then Police Chief Tomey. We knew each other from Rotary, and I said, you look really relaxed today. So there's 500,000 people in my town, And he said, none of them are drunk. In fact, most of them don't even drink. They're afraid to drop a piece of paper on the ground because they'll get sucked up in an engine. And he said, what else could be better?
It's those are the stories that make EA. It is a truly unique culture and community of people that care for each other, that take care of each other. I had a guy that, incredibly wealthy guy, brought his family and has been coming now for the last 5 years. And he came up to me and he said, let me tell you why we come here. We camp. We have our chairs out on the flight line watching the airplanes. I got my cell phone back by the shower houses plugged in charging, and I don't worry about a thing. Nobody's going to steal anything. Nobody's going to, and if my kids look lost, somebody's going to get them to where I am. I mean, it's really, there's a lot of times where you say, this could be a model for the world.
Would you consider drones as a complement to what you're doing in EA? Are they a competitor? I mean, that whole industry is really taken off as well.
It is the future. I mean, it's already, that train has left. Drones are going to replace helicopters. The Helicopter Association industry will tell you that because the missions they can do with a drone are far less expensive and safer. We view that as we're gonna work together as to how do we integrate, because we're sharing the airspace. And so we have a seat at the table back in Washington on how that airspace integration will take off. Right now, how we're looking at it from a strategy standpoint is it's a great entry point for young people to understand the science of aviation and all of those other complementary pieces of aviation I talked about, whether you're a programmer or whether you're, drones give you a way for a young kid to do that, no different than radio-controlled airplanes did when I was a kid. So we view that as complementary. We just haven't figured out yet how to, if you come to our event, we do have a drone center. We have a drone cage. This year we're going to have drone races. Again, it's how do you feed you pick an age group. I call it, my grandkids between 1 and 10, but the 1 to 16-year-old who can't actually go fly. How do you keep them interested and engaged? And that industry from a career standpoint is going to be fantastic. I mean, they're going to have the Air Force Academy. The Secretary of the Air Force met with her during AirVenture, and half of the pilots in the Air Force Academy graduating class in 4 years will be drone pilots, not stick and rudder pilots. That's where it's moving. And you think about it. I mean, I have a friend who owns a commercial. Sorry, I probably get going out. He owns a commercial construction company. He builds high rises and all that stuff. His biggest worry every night when he goes to bed is somebody getting hurt, because he has people in high risk areas and they're doing building inspections and scaffolding and all that. And he says, and high insurance premiums, I can now do that with a drone and reallocate these people to other value-added tasks. It's huge. I think you're eager to get any last questions. I'll stick around if anybody has anything. Alrighty, thank you for the invitation and the time.
Jack, thank you for that. That was really engaging. Thank you for sharing your passion, your experience, your leadership story. It was really intriguing. In terms of planning now, and me realizing my dream, in spirit of full disclosure, when I was younger, I tried to live up my dream of flying through these flying simulation games. Let's just say that well beyond the preponderance of the number of times I tried to fly, it did not end well. So before you commit to helping me with that dream, know what you're getting into. It's great to have everyone here today. If you're interested in a DVD copy of today's presentation, you can see Amy Sorensen right over here. We're also excited to have you join us for the rest of our series. The next installment of our series will be on January 10th. And Kurt Voss, CEO of Amerilux International, will speak on Culture Trumps Strategy, Make a Play. And that'll be held at St. Norbert College, again on January 10th. If you haven't picked up a brochure to get the rest of the series, I believe we have some out front. I'm going to wrap it up here and just by thanking you for being here. I thank our sponsors again. I look forward to seeing you at the next series. Thank you.